To talk about the state of college football, starting with the ACC.
3rd and 9. Four-man rush against Plummer to the end zone this time, and it's intercepted by Bethune. He made a great play earlier and comes up with the pick in the end zone.
Most college football fans are probably feeling lost. The memories of last season slowly fading into the background, and next season still months and months away. It can be daunting navigating the world, but I'm here to bring you hopefully some more college football content that can get you through this rough time, starting a series called The State of Series. The first episode, this one, The State of the ACC. We're going to look at the ACC through a mostly objective lens at what the current tiers are like, what the teams are like, what the hierarchy is, who to expect to step up, all that sort of stuff in the ACC. The State of Series is going to go conference by conference. So after this, we'll do Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and then maybe some other conferences as well, as those are the Power Four. And then we'll also do some team-specific ones potentially down the stretch. The State of Texas, the State of Ohio State, some teams that have done important things this offseason. So without further ado, let's get into it. We start off by looking at something that should be very familiar to you if you've followed this channel, and that is a tier list. We did the tier list for the entire Power 5, so it would be redundant just leading you guys on right now, slowly revealing, who's the favorites, who's the sleepers, who's the good teams, bowl teams, rebuilding bet, all that stuff. Instead, I'm just going to show it to you. So here it is, the ACC tier list. This is kind of what the hierarchy, I think, breaks down like in the ACC. And I think it's interesting to see the different phases and amount of teams in different tiers that you'll find in each conference. It depends on a lot of factors that have happened throughout the season. I think Clemson and Florida State, clearly the two teams that run this conference, and clearly the two teams that are at the top. Odds tell us that, logic tells us that, recent results tell us that. The only team that's been able to penetrate their run was Pitt back in 2021 with their insane run to win the ACC title. A decent amount of sleepers in the ACC. Teams that I think are fringe top 25 teams. Louisville, NC State, Miami, potentially Virginia Tech could all be ranked at the start of next season, in my opinion. Virginia Tech may be a little less so because I think they're less prevalent on the national radar, but it's a team that returns 85% of their production from last season. So a reason they're in the sleepers tier. In the good tier, I really think Cal's a team people are starting to take notice on a more not quite national level yet, but on a larger scale, people are starting to notice what this Cal team is sort of looking like. SMU stock is going to be pretty high. Wouldn't be surprised if they end up in some preseason top 25s. North Carolina, yes, there's no Drake May, but it's still Mac Brown running a really solid program. Outside of that, the bowl teams, Syracuse making noise this offseason with Fran Brown gives people reason to believe that can happen. And then Georgia Tech under Brent Key, the alumni who is really doing some great things there this offseason. The rebuilding tier in this conference is where the structure gets a little interesting. You've got a plethora of teams that are either welcoming in new coaches like Boston College or Duke, or in Pitt, the new offensive coordinator, Pat Narduzzi trying to reinvent himself, Virginia in a pivotal year 3, and Dave Clawson, a guy that maybe you worry the game might be passing him up. And then in the bad tier, you've got a team like Stanford, who we'll get into in just a second. So for each specific tier, I do think there's a key storyline to track. Let's make like Drake and start from the bottom with Stanford in the bad tier. What does progress look like is the key question for the teams in this tier, because Stanford is the only team in this tier. In year 2 of Troy Taylor, it's interesting. You look back to year 1, they went 3-9. They lost a game to an FCS team. Yes, they won a couple conference games. This season, going to be a ton of traveling, a ton of uncertainty. What kinds of things are they looking for? Are they looking for somebody to build something like what David Shaw had, where they were winning conference titles and competing near the top? Is that what they think they can build with Troy Taylor? Or maybe are they realizing in this modern era that's not something that's going to be as possible for Stanford football? It's tough to identify, and it's really tough to tell what the standard of success is going to be for this team going forward. And it's something that I think we'll learn as we continue to get more into the Troy Taylor era. But I think it's something very interesting to watch in itself. Does this athletic program hold itself to the same standard that it used to, or are they more accepting of the times? The next tier, it's the most crowded tier in the ACC, which is the rebuilding tier. It's 5 teams in there: Duke, Pitt, Wake Forest, Virginia, Boston College. The big question that all the teams in this tier face is, can they avoid a total rebuild? It seems like that's what these teams are trying to do at this point. Duke, I'd say probably the least successfully so. A lot of their returning production and recruiting and pretty much every metric shows that Manny Diaz is probably going to have to do a couple years of rebuilding with the Blue Devils. But for the rest of the teams on here, I think there's reasons to believe that they can turn things around, make a bowl game, push in a positive direction. Like, look at Pitt, for example. They go out and they're trying to redesign what this offense looks like. Pat Narduzzi found some success in the season where they broke through and won an ACC title with Kenny Pickett at quarterback and Mark Whipple as their offensive coordinator. But then they steered away from that, and that's been one of the reasons they've kind of struggled offensively over the last couple years, causing Pat Narduzzi to kind of rethink the way he does things. There was also the whole saga with Jordan Addison getting snatched away by USC and the tampering allegations. I think it's going to be really key to see how Pitt operates over the next couple years, to see if Narduzzi is really their guy going forward. For a team like Boston College, they also lose their coach. They have Jeff Hafley leaving for the defensive coordinator position with the Packers, but they believe that they can bring in a guy like, let's say, Bill O'Brien, who I think is who most of them expect to come in, and they think that with their roster, they can just continue to build and not have to do a hard reset where everyone leaves and they fire the staff and all that stuff. It seems like most things are intact, and it's frankly a team that was contemplating firing Hafley already. So it's almost like a blessing in disguise. Can Boston College avoid that total reset and march forward? For Wake Forest, Dave Clawson, I think, is in a very similar position to Narduzzi in the fact that his current style could just be getting irrelevant and becoming a thing of the past. They're not using NIL or the portal a ton and just trying to do their same formula that's brought them success in the past. And it's just not clear if that's something that can be sustainable, and that's something that is probably from a bygone era. Wake Forest had a pretty disappointing year compared to kind of what Clawson had been doing previously, and they haven't really improved in a lot of the areas that you would need to in this modern era. So if Clawson can't do it, that's a reset. You've got to let go of Clawson somehow and welcome in a new era, or just be destined for mediocrity. Last but not least, we've got Virginia. Virginia brings in Tony Elliott. Elliott has shown some reasons of promise. I think that he's been put in a really tough situation. There was the horrific incident that happened to several Virginia football players, and that's something that is just really tough way to start off your coaching tenure. And last season was rough for the most part. They showed some promise. They have a lot of returning production. It feels like year 3 is a make it or break it year. And so to avoid a reset, they need to see something from Tony Elliott that tells them, this is our guy, we're going to keep him. The next tier is the bowl teams tier. This is going to consist of Syracuse and Georgia Tech, 2 teams that feel very similar in terms of where they are at as a program, which helps us with the question, is the climb linear? For Georgia Tech, they're hoping so. Brent Key takes over as in an interim capacity a couple years ago. The Yellow Jackets end up going 500 with him at the helm, so that warrants him being promoted to the full-time coach, which is a huge move. I really liked the move at the time. They come out this year. They perform inconsistently throughout the year, but still overall well, make a bowl game, win a bowl game, and at 7-6, above 500. So if you're a Georgia Tech fan, you're thinking, oh, baby, let's go. 8-win season incoming, 9-win season incoming. We're going to move in the right direction. But for Yellow Jackets fans, it's really a simple question. Is success going to be linear? And if it's not, if, let's say, the team takes a step back, but the recruiting's improving and the portal classes are looking better, are you willing to have the patience to let a guy like Key, who is from Georgia Tech, have the time to build that roster out and to get things settled? Because success isn't always linear. And in the Syracuse fans' minds, Fran Brown has absolutely killed it this offseason. What he's been doing recruiting-wise is pretty unheard of in recent Syracuse memory. What he's been doing in the portal is really nasty stuff, bringing in a ton of talent and using those connections that he has with Georgia and the SEC to infuse talent that Syracuse has not seen in their recent memory on this roster. A completely new approach, and it is working really well, at least off the field. On the field, is the climb linear? I think is an excellent question, because I think some fans are hoping that it's just going to instantly translate to success, which I think it totally could. But if it doesn't, it's going to require them to show some patience in regards to letting Fran Brown get his legs under him as a head coach. So a key question for both of these programs. We are in the next tier, the good tier, where the overarching question for Cal, SMU, and North Carolina is, can they transition well? Now, this means a different thing for all three teams here. For SMU, can they transition from the group of 5 to the power conferences well? Now, I think you could argue that the ACC is probably the friendliest conference for a team to make a transition, but it's still not going to be easy. The caliber of talent that you are having to play week in and week out is just on a significantly different level than the American Conference. There are no Tulsas and East Carolinas and Temples in this conference. The worst talent-wise you're going to play is maybe a Stanford or a Virginia. Like, you're not going to get any easy wins in conference play, and I think SMU is really going to come to learn that. So it's all about how smooth their transition will be. Yes, they've been acquiring boatloads of talent through the portal, but they're going to learn this year. They're going to get a harsh reality check. Is that enough? Because we saw for Houston and we saw for Cincinnati and really UCF, it wasn't enough for them to do better than what? UCF made a bowl game and I think lost the bowl game. So for SMU, it's going to be key on the transition. For Cal, can they transition well has more to do with them going from playing West Coast teams to playing East Coast teams and traveling a ton. And yes, they have the talent. Yes, they have the returning production. Yes, Wilcox feels like he's starting to turn things around. All of a sudden, everything gets flipped on its head. Can they transition well to this new style? Will it be a chip on their shoulder, them defending the West Coast, something along the lines of that? We'll see if that's what Cal can do in 2024. And then for North Carolina, it has more to do with their quarterback, and that's how important of a player Drake May was. He was essentially the whole offense the last couple seasons. Can they transition away from Drake May in an effective manner? I would argue they've already done some things to do that. The hiring of a new offensive coordinator last year, that wasn't just a hire to satisfy Drake May necessarily, but a hire that could be sustainable down the stretch for this team. I thought at the time wasn't a great hire because of May, but now that May's gone, I think it was the right move because it's the system Mac Brown ultimately wants to run. All the way up to the sleeper teams tier, where we got 4 teams. The big question for these teams is, will someone step up in tier 2? And it's been the big question for the ACC for such a long time. The answer had only been yes to this question one time, and it's that year Pitt made a run and won the title. And you can even go back from the days that Clemson was dominating to the days that Florida State was dominating. The ACC has failed to have a tier 2 team really step it up and join the ranks of Clemson and Florida State. For a team like Louisville, and the reason there's a picture of a Texas Tech guy there, it's Tyler Shuck. He's now the quarterback at Louisville. Louisville's been amassing talent through the portal. In year 1, they went double-digit games. They competed with Florida State. They didn't get to play either of those two in the regular season, but you could argue Louisville getting pretty close under Jeff Brom. You've got a team like NC State. Dave Doran has been doing it conventionally for years, and it's worked, and they've been winning 9 games. This offseason, they're hitting the portal hard too. Maybe he took a look and said, hey, I like what Louisville's doing. Let's try some of that ourselves. They've clearly had 2024 circled on the calendar, and that's what they're building towards. So maybe NC State makes that leap this year. They almost did a couple years ago, and they've been kind of a team people have been circling recently saying they're capable. They just haven't been able to execute it and do it. Virginia Tech is another one. I think that the Hokies have a lot of returning production that could greatly bode well. It's a lot to ask of Brent Pry in just his 3rd season to be doing and competing at that level, but I do think they've got the talent, and I think when you're talking about a window team that builds towards a certain year, kind of feels like this is their window, this is their year. And then in terms of Miami's the most talented team arguably in the entire ACC right now. I don't know if people realize that. If you factor in portaling, you could say Florida State probably clears them, but pure recruiting talent-wise, recruiting class-wise, Miami's been the best recruiting team in the ACC, better than Clemson even under Mario Cristobal. And so you would expect this team to be the best position to step up. It just hasn't happened. They've had horrible turnover luck. They've had some huge play calling issues. Cristobal is under a lot of pressure this season to deliver, and I think that's a team that, logically speaking, yeah, they should be the team to step up, but will they actually? That is the big question. Last, we have the top tier. The big question, is Florida State the new Clemson? It's still Florida State and Clemson in the top tier. Don't get it twisted. Those are the two odds-on favorites. Those are the two teams I think should be in the top tier, and I think those are the two teams that have earned it. And that's the question. If Florida State wins the ACC again this season and Clemson is nowhere to be found, or even if they beat them in the ACC title game, I think Florida State has established themselves as the new crown jewel of the ACC. They're the new Clemson. They're the team that in the immediate future is running that conference, and it's the team you have to go through. And that's a title Clemson held for a long time. I believe Dabo Swinney won 6 ACC titles in 7 years or something like that. The ascension was pretty insane with the Tigers. And so the Noles trying to take that crown back, because if you remember, before Clemson went on that run, it was Florida State who was running things. And so it's kind of been a ping-pong battle between these two at the top. And until somebody else comes and challenges them, it feels like that's just bound to continue to happen. Florida State thinks, how can we beat Clemson? Clemson thinks, how can we beat Florida State in any given year? And so that's the question that I think is important to ask about these two programs. All realignment aside and where these teams could end up, I think in the hierarchy of the ACC as it currently stands, the focus should be on these two teams whenever you're talking about the conference favorites. Every other team in the ACC, I think, takes a back seat to Florida State and Clemson. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the video. If you want to see more like this, what conference you want to see next, all that good stuff, just let me know down in the comments. We just hit 1,000 subscribers after the last video, so thank you guys. That is an awesome milestone. We're going to continue to pay forward to bigger and better things as we continue to upgrade. We got a new camera for this video, a new mic. We're continuing to just upgrade stuff around CF Budge headquarters. So I appreciate all your guys' support. And as usual, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. Don't forget to do that if you're enjoying the content. And that's pretty much all I got. So I will see you guys around.